Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. This is May 21st, 2017. We're going to talk about education a little bit. Shakespeare, education, and planned failure. Here's something under the heading of, we've known this for generations. Did you study Shakespeare when you were in high school? I did. It used to be a regular part of our English Lit course of study. Today, not so much. And the question becomes, why? Well, we now have more information. We have more things happening. I have found a case in point that produces what I gotta tell you is not a very unusual result. It's a school in Australia. This school found that their exam scores increased more than 40% after Shakespeare lessons were incorporated into the curriculum. Grade averages came up 40%. Well, yeah, in Shakespeare, no, overall. The teacher, a fellow by the name of Davenport, offers this exchange and the result in the article. He tells how he began requiring his 10th grade students to memorize and recite passages of Shakespeare. Now, the kids didn't want to do this, and Aussies don't talk like that. It probably was very hard. I'm teasing. But the kids would struggle. They'd, do what you told. Well, one day, a fellow teacher overheard the Shakespeare recitation efforts of the class, and he stopped the teacher and asked him, I didn't ask, but it said something to the effect of, "You made your kids learn that speech?" And he said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Well, I think it's too hard for them." And then he walked out of the room. A young lady who was reciting at the time looked at her teacher, Mr. Davenport, and said, "What's he trying to say? Is he trying to say that I can't do this?" And the teacher responded that that's exactly what he's trying to say. They don't think you can do it. Well, Davenport goes on to say, from that point on, his students dug in to the Shakespeare, determined to prove the teacher wrong. He said, quote, "I never had another problem with any of my students learning something they were supposed to learn. They might not have gotten all A's and B's, but they no longer got D's and F's." Davenport's anecdote touches on a problem that seems to rear its ugly head every once in a while. The problem is the lack of advanced students in American schools. According to the nation's report card, 27% of high school seniors are proficient in writing. 27%, less than 1 in 3. And of that number, only 3% measured at an advanced level. A similar scenario played out in reading. 37% of students are proficient in this subject, but only 6% measure at an advanced level. Well, I thought the idea here was to help students excel. Why would schools not want that? Well, they tell us they do. But the numbers tell us something else. Why would they not look around to see what it was that would raise all of this for the child's sake? Well, the Australian illustration is not unique. There are other reports that seem to indicate that educational systems work more to discourage students from aiming high than encouraging them to do so. Why? Well, there are some very human answers. Late professor and author Christopher Leish, in his book The Culture of Narcissism, asserts, quote, "The deterioration of the educational system thus reflects the waning social demand for initiative, enterprise, and the compulsion to achieve. Contrary to the pronouncements of most educational theorists and their allies in the social sciences, the advanced industrial society no longer rests on a population primed for achievement. It requires instead a stupefied population, resigned to work that is trivial and shoddily performed, predisposed to seek its satisfaction in the time set aside for leisure." Now, based on that statement, could the lack of enthusiasm and encouragement for rigor and high achievement in today's schools be by design? The secular community is never going to consider anything but human capacity and systems. But the biblical community has access to other information, like what the Bible, God's inspired, preserved, infallible word, has to say about what's going on. Things like, there's a world we cannot see, populated by beings we cannot see, who work without rest to subvert God's purposes. But what are God's purposes? Well, in terms of human beings, it is at least that we should have dominion over the earth. Genesis chapter 1, remember? Sacrificing that, which is what Adam did, God destroyed the earth with a flood, providing a family of mankind to preserve and to perpetuate the rule of God over men until Messiah came. Now, as those who have been joined to the Lord Jesus Christ, we're called upon to grow in the grace and in the knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, to spread the good news of God's salvation, that now Jesus shall have dominion and majesty and power over all things. So who around is the one who would want to stop any of this? And how would they do it? Well, the answer to the first question is Satan and all those other angels that fell with him, that come without number. The how they would do it? By dumbing down the population and thereby subverting it in every way. What is it but the argument about evolution versus creation that you don't understand? It is about people who have been influenced by the enemy of their soul, the enemy of God, to teach a concept that is struggling to this day to find verification in what they see. Every time something comes up that doesn't fit the mold, they go, wow, we have no idea how that happened. Amazing, isn't it? The ancient world was amazing in what they were able to do. Today it's all technology, and only the more industrial societies are able to make any kind of progress. And it's no accident that Western societies have paved the way in terms of progress. China and Iran are relative newcomers, and they're still playing catch-up. The West sprang into the lead after the Reformation and is only recently showing signs of slowing down, largely due to the liberal and progressive leadership. In America, there's been a deliberate and concentrated effort not to educate our children. Yeah, deliberate effort to not educate our children. It began in the 1930s. By the 1940s, the curriculum was starting to bear the fruit. The drug culture, violence among young people, and so-called hard rock music characterized in the 1960s was the first generation to complete this progressive coursework. Today, corporate ignorance, indolence, and malaise stalks our society. Young adults are still living with their parents. We have a name for them, millennials. They're not concerned about earning their own way. They're not concerned about perpetuating their family name or society in general. They're not concerned with much of anything but their own sensual pleasures. And they seem to be frightened of their own shadow. Snowflake children? And our educational system, along with our psychological system, is leading the way. If you care about your children and your grandchildren to come, or your culture, get your children out of the government school system and do it today. I heard a very interesting interview on the radio while driving a while back, but I don't know what the program was or who it was being interviewed. The gist of the report was that government now builds or removes prisons depending on the reading level of fourth graders in a given area. Apparently, those who don't read or don't read well tend to become criminals over the next 10 or 20 years. Those who do read and enjoy doing so rarely run afoul of the law. I tried to find the storyline, but I haven't been able to get it yet. But it dovetails with what we've always known about children and about reading. If a child doesn't learn to read by fourth grade, they probably never will. It doesn't mean they can't read, but they can't read well. They're not proficient. You don't catch them sitting around reading books. This lack of proficiency cripples them in ways we cannot imagine, especially in our technological society. There was a time when people, educators and business people, would say, "Send me people who can read." When I was in education overseeing a K through 12th grade Christian school, the emphasis was on reading, in part because the curriculum demanded good reading skills, but also because of our education and what it means to read. Every child in our school had to be in a reading program, and they were sit down twice a week in front of a machine. In those days, we didn't have computers, but the story would roll up on a piece of paper in a machine through a window, and they would read the story as it went by. You could regulate the speed, and you could regulate the story for vocabulary and so forth, and you could make it bigger and bigger and bigger. Every child in that school, unless they had a learning disability, and even some who did, depending on what it was, if they were in that school for 2 years, they were reading 1,000 words a minute at 80% proficiency. Teaching a child to read ain't hard. But in the 1930s, America switched. We no longer taught our children to read with a phonics system. We went to sight reading. See, Spot, Run. That was the book I had in the 1940s. Psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Dewey, father of modern American education, was the one who put this together. He revealed that his purpose was to create a psychological laboratory out of each classroom. And some people believe that this was an effort to stop, or at least to hinder, not just reading and comprehension, but all education. And for nefarious reasons relating to what we now call the progressive movement. How do you control a society that can think for itself? Dewey was an atheist. He was a humanist. What is it that Dewey has wrought? By the 1970s, children coming out of the fourth grade were seriously deficient. Not all, but those with a lower IQ and those without parental support were having trouble. At the same time, moms were being encouraged to leave those children in the care of other people, or to leave them home alone and go out and join the workforce. How could she do this? Well, we provided ways to chemically kill our unborn children so that she didn't have to worry about getting pregnant. We called it birth control, but the pills did not prevent or control the way they were advertised. They never told us. If the communists had come over here and planned a way to defeat America, they couldn't have come up with a better plan. What are you going to do about it? It's your responsibility where you live. You got children? You got grandchildren? Do something.